The K-Jazz Show, Sundays on Kofifi FM 97.2.
It is indeed the second hour of the show, and we call it Our Africa, a time dedicated to celebrating the music of Africans by Africans, including world musicians that are inspired by the sound of our continent. And in this hour, we gather around these voices as they tell us these tales of their experiences. And this Sunday, I want us to take a moment to remember a son of the soil. This past April, we learned the passing of composer and bassist Gerald Mack McKenzie, who was the founder of the group The Genuines and also a pioneer in the genre of the sound that we know today as Goema from the Western Cape. And we are joined on the line by Leslie Javan, who is a musician, South African musician, and grew up between the Namakwa land on the West Coast and the Western Cape. A songwriter who has written songs for Valiant Swart, Karen Zoid, Nick Turner, and Zolani Mahola of Freshly Ground. Leslie joins us this morning, to reflect on the life and times of Gerald Mack McKenzie. Brother, hello. And welcome to Kofifi FM 97.2.
Hey, how's it, man?
And thank you for joining us. The story of Mack McKenzie began on the 27th of October in 1951, and he went on to become a draftsman. But we know him as a musician who performed covers from artists in the genres of jazz and soul music, and then went on to have an incredible solo career, including being a founding member of the band The Genuines in 1985. Les, take us back to those days.
Yeah, it was the days of apartheid, So there was the conscription times. There was all kinds of things, and the Genuines was one of those bands that came out of that era, and they wrote music against apartheid, the resistance music, and the sound of the music that Mac wrote. Mac and Hilton, they were the driving force in the band, was based around Goema music, which is the Cape traditional music style, and jazz and rock and punk, Mac used to say that they were the first black punk rock band in South Africa, and they probably were, because there were nobody else. I can't remember. I can't think of anybody else. But so it was basically that,
Yeah, and musician, Hilton Schilder and Mac, of course, also formed the collective, the Goema Captains of Cape Town. And they went on to release a project called Healing Destinations. But I want us to talk more about the sound that is Goema and how Mac played an important role, in the definition, maybe, of the genre.
Yeah, Goema music, when we look at local music and, when we look at local culture, it's always good to see it as like a port. It's port music, because we had people from all over the world coming, docking in Cape Town. All the sailors would come off, they would do their thing there, and they would bring their music with. So you had different kinds of music, like Goema is similar to what we have in South America, like your sambas and those kind of style. You get those styles of music all around the world, And Goema is that music that happened in South Africa, coming from Cape Town. In Durban, there's a slightly different thing, more with the Indian influence, as opposed to Cape Town. And in Cape Town, because of the port, we had people from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from Europe, from America, the minstrels from America, people from the rest of Africa, And what happened was in Cape Town at the time, in the Western Cape, you had the Khoi people with their style of music, mainly the Kochekwa tribe, they were the biggest tribe, and the influences of the other tribes as well. So a lot of those music, infused with this music. So you have indigenous music infused with all kinds of other stuff. That is why if you look at, for instance, Boere music, you find that there's stuff like fastrap. There's different styles. It's basically different styles of dances, almost like in Baroque music.
Yeah.
You know, and in his later life, Mac actually used that in writing classical music. You know, I do the same thing as a composer. You know, so we have like different dances. You know, in classical music, in Baroque music, you start off a suite with a prelude, and there's Alamand and a Courant, and there's these different styles, dances, and then you end up with a jig, you know, like a finale almost. You know?
Yeah.
And that's exactly how Max shaped the orchestra, the Goema orchestra, you know. And the same way I write as well, the same way everybody else write, you know.
Yes.
And so Goema in name, you know, is basically a culture. It's not just a music style. You know, a lot of people confuse Goema with it's Klopse music. You know, Klopse is part of Goema.
Yes.
And that is one aspect of Goema. It's the food that we eat, the way we speak, you know, all of it. Now, in the 70s, I grew up with that, you know, knowing that, with that knowledge, you know. We grew up with that knowledge, you know.
With FIFA we are chatting to musician Leslie Javan this Sunday, and he is reflecting on the life and times of the late Gerald Mack McKenzie, who transitioned this past April. And for Our Africa today, you know, Mac was a bassist and a musician from Cape Town, a pioneer in the Goema sound, which perhaps it is more likely that the word, in fact, has strong connections to Ngoma, a term referring to spiritual rituals and healing practices across many societies on the African continent, including, you know, street bands, choral music, vernacular partner dances such as Tiki Dry, and the yearly, you know, carnival season, as our guest has just elaborated. Now, Liz, you knew Mac in the last 12 years of his life and often interacted with him, you know, for the most part. Tell us about those days and how you will remember him and the impact, I guess, that he's had in your life.
Yeah, Mac was, look, the thing is, the last 12 years of our lives together was quite a story, you know. I met him when I was about 16, 17 years old through his dad, Uncle Sammy, you know. And I went with our neighbor who had a langarm jazz band, you know, Charles Isaacs. I went with him to a rehearsal in Elvis River years ago. I was about 17, I think, 16. And there I met Uncle Sammy, and Uncle Sammy introduced me eventually to his son, Gerald, who was Mac, you know. And so I met him back in those days. And over the years, you know, we spent quite a bit of time together, you know, in and out. And especially around the late 90s, I started a band called Gramadulas with late Alex van Heerden. And Alex played in Mac's band as well. So we were all playing with with this band and that band. We were interplaying with different bands. And Alex and I did a lot of research into rural music and stuff. So our band Ramadullas, we fused Boere music with jazz, with Goema, with pretty much the same as what the Genuines did before us, but we weren't that raucous. We were a bit more reserved, but a bit heavy on the metal, I did a lot of metal stuff on the guitar, and then that stuff never got released, by the way. The stuff that got released was more the Afrikaans thing, because record companies like to shape the artists and the bands and whatever. So that thing didn't work out so well for us. But those who saw us live, experienced that sound. And in the late 90s and 2000s, I spent a lot of time with Mac back in the days. That's the time when he started changing again. He was like a rabbit, he couldn't sit still. So the maverick that he was, So he was always chopping and changing, and he bought the synthesizer and he told me he's gonna write for orchestra now next. Everybody laughed at him, but I knew he was serious. And eventually started writing, and I stayed with him actually for that time. I stayed with him for about, I think, a month or two, sleeping on the couch there, And it was back in the days when we used to do drugs, and lots of alcohol. And so it was quite hectic days,
Yeah.
And but the thing is, the last 12 years, of our lives, was quite reserved, actually, more into classical, because I compose music for TV and film, and theater productions. Mac, the last 15 years of his life, he composed for the Goema Orchestra, like with lots of instruments, and they flew to Basel, to Switzerland, to Copenhagen, to different countries, and performed. And he was a mentor in that way, because I would sit down with him and we would discuss the sonata form, or the symphony form, or whatever,
Yes.
And we would look at old classical music, Stravinsky, Bach, Elizabethan period music, looking at Duke Ellington, at Miles Davis, different composers, how they would interpret the stories of their time. The music of their time, the culture of their time, and how are we doing that? How are we doing it differently, or what, and looking at, like, for instance, if I can give an example, like chords, for instance. How do you use a chord? In pop music, you have this 1-4-5 chord progression, or 1-6-4-5 chord progression, For those who don't know what I'm saying, they are basically in the key. There's basically 7 notes, So that's the numbers that I'm quoting here. So those numbers, if the one is C, C is the first one, and the fourth one will be F, stuff like that. And but in jazz or in Goema, when we reinterpret that, we don't go all the way into a modal thing which is more jazz,
as we wrap up, our conversation this Sunday, how would you like the world perhaps to remember Mac McKenzie?
He was a family man. His son actually came out from Nederland. He had a son in Nederland. Came out just before he died, Stephen, and so he was big on family, on his children, his grandchildren, one of the things about Mac, apart from being everybody's mentor and teacher, he was one of those guys. If you sit around and you talk to him about me, and you say, yeah, Les is this and Les is that, he will stop you and say, no, we don't do that here. You can do that in your head at home, or go and talk to somebody else on the street, So he was that guy. He didn't want to talk ill of people and things like that. It's always like in a mode of in a major mode, like helping people out, and assisting where he can. Very good heart, very big heart actually. When he steps into a room, everybody knew Mac was in the room, even if you didn't know him. So that is how I would like to remember him, as a friend, as a mentor, guy with a big heart, always helping people. So many people slept on the couches there at their house, with Mom Mac, his mom, making food for everybody. The house was there for everybody to come through. So he learned from his mom and his dad, that and his brother Robert, everybody, we would meander through the house. We would just pop in for like a week or stay over and then come back later in the year again and stay over another week. And there was never complaint. There was never rent. There was never none of that. He was just there to assist, where he can, And it's reflected in his music, actually. His music is very complicated. But the way, if you analyze his music and you look at how he wrote and how he interpreted the culture, because that's basically all we can do as composers and songwriters. We are the mirror image, and we are the reporters. We don't create our own thing. We look at what the world around us is doing, and then we reflect that. So,
Wow.
and it's reflected there in his work. You can see it there in his work. It's amazing stuff. His music is gonna stand for a long time. It's being curated in Switzerland. The sad part actually is there's not one South African university who's curating his work. The Swiss are curating his work at the university in Switzerland. Because that's where he played a lot, and he worked with the orchestras over there, orchestral members over there. South Africa is a bit slow, on arts and culture. They don't support us, as far as composers and other people as well. But I'm still thinking of composers and songwriters. We don't get that support that the Europeans and people overseas get.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a groot gees, great guy.
Absolutely. And well, thank you again, for joining us today and for reflecting on one of the most important figures in South African music and for helping us, preserve his memory for many years to come. We really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to having you come back, I think, to talk more about the history of music of the Capes, and the coast. In fact, South African music history, for Heritage Month, a topic that certainly needs us to explore even further.
Yes, no, definitely.
Absolutely. He is, Leslie Javan, a musician and songwriter. Of course, he joined us for Our Africa this Sunday as we remembered Gerald Mack McKenzie on The K-Jazz Show.